Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to the monthly public talk series of IEEE Women in Engineering Affinity Group Albuquerque section. I'm Aisha. I'm the chair of the IEEE Women in Engineering Affinity Group at Albuquerque section. Today, Dr. Vesna Novak, an associate professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Cincinnati, is joining us as our keynote speaker. She received her diploma and PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Ljubljana in 2008 and 2011, respectively. And she was a postdoctoral fellow at ETH Zurich, Switzerland from 2012 to 2014. Sorry about that. And then an assistant and associate professor at the University of Wyoming from 2014 to 2021. Wow. So thank you so much, Dr. Novak, for making some time to join us and share your journey as a woman in engineering. Would you like me to go through your research a little bit, or you would like to introduce?
I'm happy to talk about it unless you want to.
Well, let me just say a little bit. So her research interests include serious games, rehabilitation robotics, effective computing, wearable robotics, and human activity recognition. She is currently the principal investigator for 2 NSF and 2 NIH grants and has authored 47 peer-reviewed journal papers as well as over 50 peer-reviewed conference papers. She's also a transgender and volunteers for LGBTQ plus organizations, both in a professional and personal capacity. So before we start, I would like to ask our affinity group advisor, Dr. Tsiropulu, to say some words for our affinity group. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Aisha. Actually, it's a great pleasure to have Vesna with us today. I can share a little bit, of personal story with her. I had the pleasure to meet her. It's been around a month ago, and I enjoyed very much the discussions with her, and I find them quite supportive and quite inspirational. So I couldn't think of a better speaker for this affinity group, especially for the IEEE Women in Engineering. We are a relatively small group in Albuquerque, but a lot of our students are first-generation college students or first-generation higher education students. So it's really important for us to have speakers here who can share their vision. They can share also their personal story of how they succeeded either in academia or in industry. And it's a very great pleasure of having Vesna here with us today. And I don't want to take more time from her. So Vesna, the floor is yours.
Outstanding. Hey, thank you very much for that nice introduction. Let me toss this up here. And let's get the party started. So thanks everybody for coming. As introduced, I was all over the place, Slovenia, Switzerland, Wyoming. If you're not familiar with Slovenia or Wyoming, I have this important slide to illustrate the critical differences between the 3 locations, which I think are self-explanatory. And about me on a more personal note, I got into engineering because I was good at math, but I found engineering to be a bit too rigid and concerned with predictable things, and I liked more the chaotic nature of a lot of engineering things. And I had always wanted to also kind of double major in psychology, which I never did. But because of that, I ended up getting into a lot of these topics like affective computing, which is measuring people's mental states, and wearable robotics, where you put things on people, and games, which we are going to talk about today. It helps that I'm a huge nerd again. Serious games, if you are not personally familiar, are games, obviously, that are serious. The point is not to entertain a person. They should be entertained, but that's kind of a secondary thing. The actual thing that you are trying to do is get people to do things that are important and should get done regularly, but are not actually fun in most ways. So very commonly, serious games get used to promote exercise because a lot of people should be exercising and don't really want to because it's not that fun, and they get used for education and other topics as well. And I personally got into serious games through rehabilitation robotics. I was doing signal processing in rehab robotics. And I was like, this robot is fine, but what I really want to know is how the human feels about this robot and how we can get the human to use the robot more often. So we'll talk about serious gains for motor rehabilitation very briefly. Motor rehabilitation is basically the process of recovery from a neurological injury. You have a brain injury, you have a stroke, you have a traumatic brain injury, you break your spine. Now you can't move your limbs because of neurological damage. And you can fix that by just exercising very intensely and extensively, just doing a movement 20,000 times. That can be very exhausting. So people have made robots whose job is to basically hold the patient by the arm and help them move the arm. So if the patient is too weak, the robot is like, hello, I see you are weak. Let me help you. And just kind of moves them along so that the patient doesn't get immediately tired and can just keep going for a longer amount of time, which is great. And then back when this thing got started, people would make what they called activities of daily life on a PC. So this patient would do arm motions, and on the screen in front of them, they had like a little display that was like, as you do this motion, you will pick up this piece of meat and put it in a pan. Now go and do this other piece of meat, put it in this pan again, and do that over and over to train the exercise. And the hope was that if you do this 20,000 times, you now don't need a robot anymore. And people said, we can train all sorts of real life activities where this might be relevant, like cleaning a window with your arm, to which patients said, you know, that's great, but I don't want to freaking clean my windows 20,000 times for this exercise. It is not actually fun for me, which is where serious games started to come into motor rehabilitation. People made games like, here, throw a ball and catch this ball. Walk through a forest and try to find your way by answering trivia questions to figure out what you're doing. Do these kinds of motions where you try to solve puzzles by putting objects into the correct thing. Or for pediatric use, just kind of like use your arm or your legs to guide a diver exploring and searching for undersea treasure, which is like, I would rather personally do that than clean my windows 20,000 times or one time. I don't really clean my windows, to be honest with you. So our group got into this because one thing we started getting interested about was, could we bring social interaction into this? Games are fun. Could you play with somebody else? Could you compete with a patient? Could you cooperate with a patient? And when we started doing this, nobody had really done it very much, although all the medical doctors and therapists said it would be cool for a patient to work with a therapist or with another patient. And it works great in games for weight loss. So we said, maybe we could do this for motor rehabilitation or not. And we set up a series of studies that were basically engineering psychology, because we were programming robots and programming exercises and then seeing how people would like them. So check it out. First study we did back in the day, we said, let's make people compete with each other and cooperate with each other while exercising. And we'll see, are they more motivated? Do they exercise more intensely than if they are by themselves? Is competition better than cooperation? Is it vice versa? Who will like this? It was the first study, so this was not a long-term clinical study. We just brought people in and said, let's play games with robots and see what will happen. So behold, 2 patients, 2 rehab robots playing air hockey versus each other. The robot has the power to guide you through motions and help you, and it only costs a paltry $150,000 to do so. And we said, okay, you're gonna play air hockey with or against each other, and the robot is going to help you, and we'll see how that goes. And we coded up a single player game mode and a competitive mode. Single player, you play against the computer. Competitive mode, you play against the other person, is now on the other side of the screen. Cooperative, both of you are on this side, and there are 2 computer opponents on the other side. And this was the very first study. We'll get to more, but we got a bunch of, let's say, motor unimpaired people to play this, and 4 pairs of chronic stroke survivors, age matched, to see what would happen. And we just had them play for 5 minutes each mode to see how they would like it with the robot programmed and whatnot. You could guess what happens is, good for us, nobody liked playing alone. 2 of the 30 unimpaired participants said they would prefer to play alone. The others were mainly split between competition and cooperation. And they largely agreed that competing is actually more intense, but it's also stressful as hell. So, some trade-offs. Now, the problem here is you're an engineer and you're like, I would prefer to only make one exercise. Can I just make a competitive exercise and everybody will like it? Or can I just make a cooperative exercise and everybody will like it? So we broke up the people who said that they really liked competition and the people who said that they really liked cooperation. And we measured their enjoyment in the different games. And then we were mildly annoyed to learn that people who liked competition only liked competition and not cooperation. And the people who liked cooperation also did not like competition, which made us sad because we said, oh, clearly we're going to have to make 2 types of exercises, not just be cheap and get away with one. That's life. That's okay. And we also checked how much effort they put into the exercise. And we similarly find if you like competition, you don't necessarily like cooperation. You don't put effort into cooperation. And if you like cooperation, you don't put effort into competition either. So it's like, clearly this is the kind of thing that you have to tailor to individual people. Then you start asking questions like, can you predict if someone will like competitive exercises in robotics? Turns out you can. Officially speaking, per psychology terminology, people who preferred cooperation over competition were more emotionally unstable, which means they were more easily upset and less competitive, and tended to not be playing with close friends. And that was the unimpaired participants. We checked if the stroke survivors would also exhibit that same result, because people are like, you know, there's no guarantee a 70-year-old man with brain damage is going to enjoy competing with another 70-year-old man with brain damage. We found that, in fact, they did. And let me tell you, if you've never heard a 70-year-old man swear at a different man in German, saying, "Ha, I smoked this guy," you have not lived. This is science. It's old men insulting each other in Swiss German. And we had the same experience. People who were like not easily upset tended to like competition, and people who were easily upset and not competitive tended to prefer the cooperative mode. And we had one pair who really hated each other, and coincidentally, what the uncompetitive one, the not competitive one, kicked the butt of the competitive one, and they both hated it and said they never want to do this again. So, pros and cons of such exercise. And we said, outstanding. People enjoy two-player exercise compared to single-player exercise. Especially competitive exercise seems to be more intense, though it's not for everyone. And this was only one session. And we did follow-up work where we actually compared this in a much bigger sample. We wanted to see how people would feel about, let's say, playing with another stroke survivor versus playing with their spouse or kids versus playing with their therapist, which turns out no one likes playing with their therapist. Everybody just liked playing with their loved ones, mostly spouses, sometimes kids. So we said, let's try that. And we did a follow-up study. At that point, I had moved to Wyoming. If you have seen the state of Wyoming, you do not buy $150,000 robots in the state of Wyoming because we don't have money in Wyoming. So we couldn't do this kind of stuff. But we moved to Wyoming and we said, let's do 4 sessions instead and see if people will still enjoy this kind of exercise. And we let people do 4 sessions. First 3 sessions, they compete with each other. And then the 4th session, we got them to play alone for comparison. And we said, if they like competition that much, what do we expect? Session 1, it's going to be great. Session 2, it's going to be great. Session 3, it's going to be great. And session 4 is going to suck because they're not going to like it, if this is really that good. Now, because this was in Wyoming, had to scale this down a bit, and we just got to use a passive arm tracking device on a laptop, and we took this to people's houses, and we made them play with their spouses or kids or best friends just in their house. And we got the loved one to just use a joystick, and the stroke survivor used this tracking device. Because turns out in Wyoming, you don't have expensive hardware, and everyone lives 100 miles away from you, so they're not coming to your house, to your lab. You have to go to their house and set this up in their house. So we did that. We set up algorithms for difficulty adaptation that would change the game for both people with factors like, if they're both good, speed up the game, slow it down, see how they like it. If one of them's better, make this Pong game harder for one person. So imagine this person is really bad at playing Pong. They're just bad at it. So you program the thing to detect, oh, the red person sucks. Well, that's okay. Now this red person has just an enormous paddle, and whether they like it or not, they will succeed at the exercise. And we ran intelligent adaptation for people during exercise. And we tried this with 15 pairs of stroke survivors at their house, playing with a loved one. And just for comparison, we tried 10 pairs of stroke survivors playing with each other at the University Rehabilitation Institute, which we had to outsource to a different university in a different country because Wyoming does not have rehabilitation institutes because it's a rectangle up north of you. And we, again, measured enjoyment, but we also measured how intensely they exercise and how long they exercise. We told them that they have to play for 10 minutes, and then we did not stop them. We just wanted to see how long they would exercise before they remembered that they could leave. And first thing we asked them, after 4 sessions, we said, did you prefer playing with your loved one or by yourself? And you would imagine that if they liked it, the competition, they would all say, I really liked playing with my loved one, not by myself. Luckily, that is exactly what the results turned out to be. We had a very lopsided distribution where everybody mostly strongly preferred playing with somebody else. I don't know what was up with this pair. Probably didn't like each other. That's okay. Then we measured enjoyment during the exercise, and we said we have 4 sessions. First 3 sessions they compete with each other. 4th session they play alone. So you're hoping that if this is good, first 3 sessions they will enjoy it, and then once they have to play by themselves, they will not enjoy it anymore. Which again, we were delighted to learn that that was in fact what happened. First 3 sessions, average enjoyment was about the same. 4th session, we switched them over to solo exercise, and enjoyment not so much anymore. Which was, again, a bunch of engineering involved in getting this thing into people's houses and programming it and tracking motions, but then also just seeing, like, does this work for humans in a useful manner? We also checked their intensity. We checked the duration of the exercise. I don't need to show you graphs because we don't have time, but they also play much less time as soon as you switch them over to playing alone. A bunch of people were just waiting for that 10-minute minimum so they could stop playing. And we said, outstanding work. That was people at their house playing with their loved ones. And it was more enjoyable and more intense, and they played longer when competing than playing by themselves. We said we have these pairs also who are doing this at the University Rehabilitation Institute with other stroke survivors. Will they also like it? Maybe. Maybe we will also get such great results. No, they're terrible. They really hated it. We don't even look at graphs because people who are playing in the hospital absolutely did not enjoy this exercise. So it was again like, oh, you can do this at people's houses, but you're not going to be bringing this into hospitals because they didn't enjoy it. And it turned out, we started thinking, why not? And it's like, they don't know each other. They're not friends. They're just people who are in the hospital together. They're kind of more introverted at that point because they're at the hospital still. Maybe let's give them a cooperative exercise. And we actually coded them up a little cooperative exercise. It was quite cute. They had 2 arms. One person got an arm, one person got the other arm, and they exercised together to put this food into a bowl. And then we gave them different recipes where they had to be selective and make food together. And while they tried to do that, flies would fly in and try to eat their food. And if you got flies into the food, then you had to start over. So they had to coordinate and talk to each other and be like, okay, quick, you go swat this fly. I'm going to grab this food. You swat this fly. Got to do it. Let's do this. And it was much more chill. They don't compete with each other, but they had to coordinate. So they were encouraged to socialize with each other. And at that point, we actually got positive results. So it was, again, one of those things. It's like, it's not for everyone, but try a different approach and it may motivate them. Now, the takeaway from this part is that these are games, they're computer games, you program them, you run them on people, but they improve motivation and they improve exercise intensity compared to exercising alone. And it's actually fairly cost efficient. One of those robots costs $150,000. Getting a game in on top of that robot is peanuts, very little money compared to building a robot. But the payoff was quite good because people were now exercising more intensely and longer without getting tired. So it's kind of like it seems nonsensical in some ways because you're just making gains, but you are bringing benefits to an expensive technology with not that much additional labor and not that much cost for the patient, because if patients are doing this at home, the game is very cheap for them and it encourages them to exercise. They don't need to spend $500 on the game. They can just download it and play with their spouse. So as engineers, we don't do this long term, but we hope in the long term, if they're exercising longer and more intensely, they'll probably also benefit more from the exercise, though we would need a clinical trial to say more. And that's not really an engineer thing, but we actually did plan a 20-session clinical trial of competitive and cooperative exercises in a clinic where we gave them several games and we paired them up with partners in the clinic and we brought them in and we did a pilot run back in 2019 with 9 sessions. And for 9 sessions, these people were doing really well. They were sticking to it. They were actually really enjoying their exercises. We said, this is outstanding preliminary data for an R21 grant proposal or whatever grant proposal it would be. We will run an actual 20-session trial, and we scheduled the start date for April 2020, which did not work out. Sadly, COVID did not make that very easy for us. That entire thing got put on the back burner. So we were deeply depressed, and it was COVID, and we said now we need a new idea, which we're about to switch to. But I am pleased to tell you that although we switched away from this, people have actually run clinical trials with this now, and they've shown that it actually improves long-term outcomes of rehabilitation to do it this way. But in April 2020, we were all deeply depressed because it was COVID and you could not run in-lab experiments with patients rubbing each other and like talking to each other at close distance. So we said, we're sad. We need a new idea for a serious game. And we got into serious games for transgender voice training because I coincidentally transitioned in 2019 and 2020. So this was on my mind. And we're like, let's do games for voice training and do them over the internet. We will not have to worry about COVID because we will not be physically touching people. And we'll just run that. We got the idea in the COVID era as like what can you do without touching people? And we should probably contextualize what the hell transgender voice training is. Okay, in case you don't somehow know transgender people, the definition of transgender people is they have an incongruence between gender identity and sex assigned at birth. And that includes a lot of identities. And because of this incongruence, that mismatch, they experience a lower quality of life. And there's a lot of things you can do that. You can pop hormones. You can just go and buy estrogen and inject it into yourself, and then you grow hair and other body parts. Or you can get surgery done. You can get counseling, socially transition, things like that. And trans women people are like, oh yeah, there's certain body parts we need to adjust, trans men. There are certain body parts we need to adjust. Somehow nobody really thinks about voice, even though it turns out if you have been listening to me talk, which I really hope you've been listening to me talk, I do not have the girliest voice. It could be much worse. It could be like this. But, you can tell that clearly voice remains entirely unaffected by estrogen in trans women. There is nothing that estrogen will do in this regard. Testosterone will do it in trans men, but not always enough. You can get surgery, but it's expensive, and the outcomes of it are suboptimal because you can't talk for like 6 months, and then yeah, exactly. And then you whisper for a while, and it often doesn't sound great. There's a lot of side effects, so most people don't do that. Alternatively, what you can do is do vocal exercise. You can train your voice to sound more masculine or feminine, and you can get a professional to teach you how to do that, which costs a little over $100 an hour and is usually not covered by health insurance. It's getting better. People who provide this have also started getting better at just claiming that it's for something else, so health insurance will cover it. But it's usually not covered. You have to find somebody who will do it, and they tend to be in high demand to teach you how to sound different. So you have to find them. They have to be qualified. If you don't have that, you can try to do it with a video online. There's videos. People describe them as like doing yoga off a video. You can follow the instructions, but there's no guarantee that you're doing this correctly unless you are getting some guidance. So we said, brilliant, let's make an app for it. These robots for rehabilitation can already guide your arm and help you make movements. Can we make a game to help you train your voice so that you sound different? Which basic stuff you could do is just tell people how to do exercises. Just give you instructions, give you a video of how to do voice exercises, which, if you don't know, a lot of them are similar to singing exercises. So all of the like do, re, mi, fa, sol, like that kind of stuff still applies to some degree. What you really want the computer to do now is actually to listen to you and give you feedback and say, hey, that was great. Maybe you should try it like this instead, and then remind you how to do and when to do voice exercises, which is kind of like Duolingo also. Like, it's not that different as far as a game for this kind of practice. This was an outstanding idea in 2020 because it was COVID, and you can't do motor rehabilitation without physical contact. But you can practice voice by talking into Zoom, into your microphone, and just getting your voice analyzed with signal processing and getting feedback back. Yes, we're actually going to talk about that at the end.
Okay.
Yes, excellent idea. And there are some apps that do exist, but they're very basic. They are not good. So we said we shall make a better one because we are engineers and we have full confidence. And I was a white man for 30-something years, so I have maximum confidence despite not earning it. But we said first we should ask people what they actually want. So we went and asked 23 transgender people about this. We had them fill out a survey, and then we interviewed them to tell us what they want out of this. And they all said they really want structured exercises and they want feedback about how they are doing during that exercise. And some of them want to do it with a voice therapist, with a human professional, and some of them want to do it alone. Because you can do this. Imagine you get you pay a human therapist to give you guidance once a week, and then as homework, you go and do this with an app every day, and you come back in and you have the human and they give you more advice. And then you go and exercise and you save money because you don't have to get a human every time. And some people said, I want to do this without a therapist because I live in rural Wyoming and nobody knows that I'm transgender and nobody is allowed to know that I'm transgender. So I just want to mess with this on the internet without anybody knowing, very secretly, to see if I like it. And they also wanted performance tracking, reminders, things like that. They actually did not want things to look too much like a game. And they don't want to socially interact with other people, which made me sad because I had also done all of that stuff with competitive gaming. So they all said they hate that. I was sad. And they said, don't make it look too much like a game, which we said, great. We know how to make things look bad. We are engineers. We also learned a lot of very interesting stuff about how autistic people and disabled people feel about this. We had blind people give us feedback on voice and autistic people. We can talk about that later, but I don't want to go on a tangent. And we actually got NIH money for developing and evaluating a prototype with real-time feedback. We got the money on December 1st of last year, so we were all kind of blindsided by it because we were getting ready for vacation. And we have a first prototype that if you want, you can just go out to this link and pull it up and mess around with it. I have never told anyone about it before outside our lab, so it is not built for other people right now. It has no help functionality, but you could go look at it if you really wanted to. And right now, we're only targeting trans femmes, trans women, let's say, because they seem to outnumber trans men at voice clinics. Most trans people at voice clinics are trans feminine participants who lean pretty heavily into the binary of gender. And right now we are mostly targeting pitch. And you all know what pitch is. It's oh. It is not the main contributor to gender perception, which transgender people will immediately tell you. We're still targeting that. Do you want to know why? It's because the main contributors are things like vocal resonance, which is what's vocal resonance? And people say, you can measure vocal resonance by taking a fast Fourier transform of voice and then find the second, third, and fourth peak of a Fourier transform and see what frequency they're at. And then that is your indicator of vocal resonance. And if you tell that to the funding agency, they will say, huh? If you tell them pitch, they say, oh, great, pitch, I understand, let's do this. So we started with that because it's easy to understand. And we had set up a bunch of exercises like this. Check it out. 5-syllable staircase. You have a phrase, bigger and better, and you have low pitch, medium pitch, high pitch, up, down, and you're practicing pitch control. So you're going bigger and better, drum and bugle corps, kind of up and down in pitch. And as you do it, it kind of shows you how you did tracking that. And then people can set these targets for themselves and be like, oh, okay, this is how I am doing pitch-wise. And you can use that to practice pitch control. There is a constant mode where you can just set your target pitch to a constant level and speak and import text and just read it and see if you can hit the stereotypically feminine pitch range. Air quotes, very heavily. There are things like matching a human pitch contour, where we recorded actual humans in this case, cis women. We recorded like 6 cis women of different races, backgrounds, accents, and we had them say phrases. And then you can try to mimic how they say it. You can play back the phrase and hear it how they say it. You can pick your preferred avatar. Not yet, because that's broken right now, but theoretically you can. And just try to mimic this kind of femme speech. And it shows you like, oh, over here, you did a bad job. This is where you were, and this is where the speaker was. Over here, you did pretty good. It switches to yellow to indicate that you were within the target range. So we're very early on in development of this, but it's again a thing of like, oh, you try to show people how to do the exercise. You give them an exercise to do that they can do on their own at home without spending any money, because this is free. It's open source. You can go on GitHub and take our code and build on it. And it's just an exercise that people can do at their house without any investment. We're doing a bunch of other stuff right now. We're doing other exercises to practice pitch controls, like heteronyms, which is things like content, content, same spelling, different pronunciation. We're making people practice multiple things simultaneously. What people will find is they can raise their pitch pretty high, but then they get really quiet because it's very tiring. So we try to get them to simultaneously modulate their pitch and stay loud. We are doing long-term assessment and performance tracking so they can see how they did versus last week versus last month, which is limited by privacy concerns, because turns out there's a lot of transgender people who say, no, I don't want an app on the internet recording my voice while I secretly practice in my house, and I don't want this stored on a university server somewhere on the internet. And they just say, if I have to do that, then I'm not doing the exercise. So it's kind of tricksy in that regard. And we're trying to do those resonance exercises, which is considered to be one of the bigger contributors to how feminine or masculine your voice sounds. But it's been hard because people have no idea what resonance is or how to visualize it or how to do anything with that visualization. But we're working on it. And we've been doing usability evaluations just over Zoom with transgender women. And people who know other apps say, oh, this is already way better than other apps because they are bad. That's more of a criticism of other apps. And we're working on usability and making a help functionality so we can run an alpha release late spring. And we have funding to actually run this for a month as kind of homework between human coaching sessions. Although there's a lot of interesting big picture dilemmas here regarding transgender people and gender and voice that are things like, oh, we can give you this recording of a woman, a cis woman saying something. Do you really want to sound like her, or do you want to find your own voice? And also other fun things like, should you really be trying to modify your voice just to fit in with society, or should you just get over it and just like sound the way that you are comfortable with sounding? Is a thing that should probably be explored. There's a lot of stuff on like racial differences and like language differences in voice gender perception, where it's like very clear that different backgrounds perceive gender differently. And nobody knows how. Like, no one has actually done research into this. So it's kind of like, even if you're British, like American coaches don't necessarily know what to do with a British accent, let alone all the other fun stuff that you might have involved here. But if this is successful, this is again one of those serious game things that's like, you can get this for free we're going to give it to people open source. They can just have it. It took us some time to develop, but hopefully people can use this to exercise at their house and derive some benefit, like making their voice sound the way they want it to sound, being happier with it without a major investment, even though there's still quite a lot of engineering in it, of like signal processing, acoustic analysis, matching this to how people want to sound, giving you recommendations, giving you performance tracking. And long term, we're kind of hoping that this will improve to some degree quality of life for transgender people. And there's a lot of generalizable benefits to this to other things, like people want to use it to similar approaches to train children with pathological voice production, kids who can't pronounce certain sounds. They want to use it to like track people who had throat cancer to see how they're doing. Lots of interesting applications of serious games right here. Don't ask me on a recorded line what right-wing media thinks about this, but they do have opinions. Anyway, that's kind of it for the stuff that I wanted to talk about regarding serious games. The main thing I wanted to show is like, it's all still STEM. It's all like engineering and computer science and just using software to make stuff that it's not actually expensive, but has the potential to like benefit people by making them do exercises, maybe at their house, pushing them to do things they would otherwise maybe not be motivated to do on their own. So it's a fun little intersection of STEM and psychology with a lot of applications. Other stuff I do, exoskeletons, affective computing, which is stress recognition and workload recognition. If you ever want to talk to me about that kind of stuff, feel free. And of course, I must thank all of my collaborators and people who give me money. And feel free to email me if you ever want to talk about some of this later as well. That's it for me. Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Novak. I'd like to ask the participants if you have any question. Now is the right time to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi. So I wanted to ask, how do you incorporate feedback from, let's say, the transgender individuals into the app design?
Okay, so excellent question. So as we said, like first we interviewed them to just get an idea of what people want. And they actually told us quite a few things that they don't want from us. And I'm super not qualified to run interviews, but they send me to run all of the interviews because people tell me things that they wouldn't tell certain other individuals. And every time we've been running out new prototypes, we have been giving every prototype kind of to transgender people in every iteration as it comes out. I test it first because I kind of know this, but like everything gets run by transgender people in kind of the least pushy way, and we try not to steer them towards certain answers. And then if they tell us to change things, we do. And we have been running additional interviews to just be like, okay, what do you think about this without having, let's say, a prototype? Like, how would you feel about this? How can we implement this? And we found that they're willing to give us quite a lot of stuff if they feel like we are listening to them.
Actually, I have a question. It's very engineering oriented. Now
Outstanding.
I wear the hat of the PI because this research is very, very interesting. And actually, I wasn't aware of this field of research. So the data that you collected with the interviews, Do you have like any database where you have cleaned and, you know, anonymized the data that you think they can be available for further testing? The reason that I'm asking that is that I can see, again, I see from my eyes that I can see applications of reinforcement learning, like, I don't know, like creating like a leaderboard type of thing where people can get, it's again still in the concept of gamification, that the people can feel engaged and like when they improve in the process, they, you know, and reaching the goal. So I'm not sure if that data is anywhere available.
Okay, so I will tell you, the interviews themselves, the paper that came out of this is actually very fascinating because actually I think I have it right here. This is the specific paper in question, but there's a lot of just like things like just dropping direct quotes in here, which I was also not used to it as an engineer, but just like giving quotes from people. And they actually give us like very like open answers. And we have these transcripts saved and we've cleaned them up and anonymized them. We don't have them publicly shared, but we have shared them with people who want to have transcripts of the interviews. Sharing voice data here is like very touchy because a lot of people are not willing to share voice data because they are like a nervous population. So one of our collaborators is like collecting a database of like transgender voices at different stages of transition and different binary, non-binary identities and trying to like use that, for instance, could you acoustically differentiate? Could you make predictors? Some people are willing to share that, some people are not. And there's again like some controversial stuff here because I know one engineer made like an algorithm that will tell you how feminine your voice is. And then immediately people like, who the hell are you, the algorithm, to tell me that my voice is feminine? All I want to know is what is the pitch range? What is the resonance range? It's quite touchy and it's like a level of like complicated that I was not aware of when I was doing stroke research, where it's a lot more like it's a motion. It's a you either did the motion or you didn't.
I see.
So voice database is not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I'm thinking loud, you know, how if, for example, if you apply like a reinforcement learning algorithm that can give you a feedback practically from a designed system of, I don't know, like how you can control your pitch level, if that's doable. I really don't know, but it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people also do reinforcement learning for stroke rehabilitation, where you try to like suggest exercises and guide exercises. And even there, it's a little complicated because your sample sizes are limited. And when you try doing reinforcement learning in rehabilitation, there's always a worry that you're going to hurt the patient when they do it.
I see.
Because people always worry like, oh, what if the patient hurts themselves? It's tricky, but it's definitely one of those things that people are trying to do.
I see. Yeah, very interesting. Aisa, back to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for your talk. So I would like to ask a very generalized question, actually. I'd like to ask, since you have mentioned in our flyer, as well as the abstract and all over your talk, that you're a transgender and you're driven by your own identity as a transgender to do your research. Would you like to give an advice? Because since the video will be up at YouTube, if you want to give an advice to anyone out there that are confused, as a researcher that does her research on transgender and is a transgender herself.
I am obligated to tell you that you're not allowed to say a transgender anymore. It's an adjective, not a noun.
Oops, I am really, really sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. But if we're recording this, I feel like I should say it.
Yes, absolutely. I am sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine. Transgender people can also tell who's just genuinely making mistakes and who's being a jerk. And I don't think you're being a jerk. It's just kind of like being transgender is complicated. It's gotten a lot better these days in some ways. It is kind of like find people close to you, talk to people close to you, get on Discord. Discord has been very good. There's like Discord groups specifically for training transgender voice, for example, that we have talked to in this regard. And most regional areas will have some kind of like Discord server or like local meetups. And universities will usually also have like LGBTQ centers to some degree in that regard. If you're doing research with transgender people, it's kind of like nothing about us without us. So it's like get some transgender people who have veto power over your research, because if they think that you're listening to them, they will tell you when you're doing stupid things. But engineers tend to forget that a lot of times. So it's kind of like, if you're transgender, find other transgender people. I don't know, email me if you don't have better ideas. I'll talk to you. And if you're doing research with them, just to make sure that they have some decision-making power and aren't just being used as participants.
That's a very, very nice message.
That is very nice. Thank you so much. It was a very insightful talk today. I believe I've learned a lot. And I hope that all our participants today has also learned a lot from you. And we will be publishing the video very soon, and I will be sharing a link with you. And before we close, is there anyone that would like to ask another question before we all leave?
Actually, I would like to thank personally Vesna, because I know that it's already slightly late over there. We appreciate very much your time and also sharing your research and your experience with this group.
Oh, always a pleasure to catch up with you specifically and to talk to other people about this kind of research. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So we will be closing the talk for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And we have also concluded in time. So good night, everybody. See you in the next.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.